Return of the Hanged Man by Nancy Roberts. The Whaley House in San Diego has the rare distinction of being authenticated by the United States Chamber of Commerce as genuinely haunted. What does genuinely haunted mean? We must visit Old Town to find out. The late June Reading, a graduate of the University of Minnesota, was a longtime curator and chief historian of the house. She undoubtedly did more research and knew more than anyone else in the world about the family who built it. Located north of downtown San Diego, it is an historic site that people from all over the world come to visit. No members of the Whaley family inhabit the house, at least none that are alive. Whaley House has been written about in many publications, and if you've been wondering as you read these stories, what makes a house haunted, a description by D. Scott Rogo, author of In Search of the Unknown, is enlightening. It seems to describe this home perfectly. Rogo says that what is necessary are the apparitions, unaccountable cold feelings or sensations of being touched by something intangible, and other phenomena such as lights, footsteps, rappings, movement of objects, unaccountable odors, and presences. According to June Reading, Whaley House has exhibited every one of these phenomena and more since 1960, the year the house was open to the public, and the manifestations are still going on. Mrs. Reading was active in the restoration of the house from the very beginning. The first events she remembers occurred during the early work. I found myself alert for any sound later as I stood beside her and listened in the narrow downstairs hall. One day in the spring of 1960, I had come over here early, intending to see about furnishing the upstairs rooms. 2 staff members from the San Diego Historical Society were on loan to me to help with the delivery of the furniture and other items. As I walked to the back door, they followed me. When I reached up to unbolt the door, we clearly heard the sound of walking across the upper floor. My companions insisted that someone else was in the house, so I mounted the stairs and called out, hoping to get a response. There was no reply. As I turned to come down, saying, "There's no one upstairs," we both looked at each other and said, "Well, maybe Thomas Whaley has come back to look the place over." Suddenly, we heard the sound of footsteps coming from the bedroom above us, as if someone were walking in heavy boots. "Who is upstairs?" I asked one of them. I shook my head, and he laughed about spirits and coming back to look things over, and I thought no more about it. Mrs. Reading and I walked up the stairs together as she continued the story. At the time, I thought another workman had arrived ahead of us, but later, when I came to see, no one was up here. At first, we were so busy getting the place ready for the public that I was really unaware of unusual sounds in the house. But in the days after it was opened, I would often hear the same footsteps and find myself going upstairs again and again, sure that someone must be up there. Sometimes it happened when I was busy at my desk downstairs or when visitors were on the lower floor. I would sit at my desk and hear heavy feet descend the hall stairs, but for some reason they always stopped about 3 steps away from the bottom. One morning in October of 1962, I was giving a talk to about 25 school children who were touring the house. This time the sound of the footsteps began to come from the top of the flat roof. The children began to look up at the ceiling curiously and ask, "Who's making that noise?" So I went outside, expecting to see a repairman sent by the county. No one was up there. When I mentioned some of these events to people in the neighborhood, they said, that sort of phenomenon has gone on for years. The last member of the family to live in the house was Lillian Whaley. She was well aware that unusual things went on there, and during the many years she lived in the house, she had often complained about them. On one occasion, she even told of a heavy china cabinet that suddenly toppled over without cause. That was in 1912, 1 year before Frank Whaley's death. Lillian Whaley lived in the Whaley house all her life and was the only child who did not marry. She was 89 when she died in 1953. On one occasion, while Mrs. Reading was guiding a tour, a woman visitor complained that she had felt unseen hands pushing her out of the upstairs bedroom, and many have mentioned smelling cologne, rose water, or the aroma of cigar smoke when they have been alone in one of the rooms. One such tourist, Mrs. Kirby, wife of the director of the Medical Association of New Westminster, British Columbia, was convinced that she had seen an apparition of a woman in the house's courtroom. Mrs. Kirby described a small, olive-skinned lady in a bright calico dress with a full skirt down to the floor who simply stared right through me. One of the ghosts, who, I am told, has been seen in the house with regularity, is Squire Augustus S. Ensworth. Ensworth was an attorney who managed Thomas Whaley's business enterprises in San Diego while Whaley was in the quartermaster department in San Francisco during the Civil War. He was very fond of the Whaley house and took great pride in keeping it in good repair during Mr. Whaley's absence. Augustus Ensworth's spirit is said to still hover protectively around Whaley House. Mrs. Anna Whaley is presumably responsible for the occasional snatches of piano music. And then there are evidences of the playful spirit of little Tom Whaley, who died in one of the upstairs rooms when he was only 17 months old. An event occurred just before Christmas, Mrs. Reading recalled, when several of us were in the old courtroom getting popcorn and cranberry ropes and other old-fashioned ornaments ready for the tree. One of the hostesses very quietly went around to get a good view and shot a picture of us all. After the film had been sent off and developed, she brought in the prints. To her own and everyone else's amazement, over at the edge of the group stood a woman in period dress. The resemblance to Mrs. Whaley was striking. The eerie things that have happened to guides in the house and to tourists as well do not occur every day. Sometimes weeks go by and nothing out of the ordinary occurs. Nothing, that is, that would send chills down one's spine or cause one to shiver on a warm day, but then something will take place that no one can explain. June Reading told the story of such an event. In the early 1980s, a lovely college girl named Denise Parnell worked at the house during the summer, and from the moment she arrived, she went around telling everyone how she would love to see a ghost. Things like this can be dangerous to say, particularly in certain houses where even the walls may be listening. I always thought it was like tempting Providence. But Denise kept right on it. I talked with her and advised her to be patient. Denise, sooner or later you're going to hear wailing. You're going to hear music, and you'll even get the feeling that someone is touching you. You will have all the kinds of things happen to you. Of course, I was right. It was during Christmas vacation, and she was like a child, loving to dress up in costume. We always do that here at the house on special occasions. That afternoon, we were all in our old-fashioned long dresses, and there was a cold rain most of the day, so we had very few visitors except for one little boy. This boy walked all over the house, trying to hear the sound of a ghost. He also sat on the stairs, thinking that if he concentrated, he might hear footsteps. The kid that had come here was so cute. I remember him because he had on a pair of tennis shoes that were unusually clean. The hostesses were sitting around because there was so little activity. I hadn't eaten anything, and it was getting into the afternoon, so I told him I was going to go out and have some lunch. When I came back, they were all waiting for me at the front door. Before I could even get my coat off, they said, "While you were gone, we heard the footsteps upstairs. Not once, but twice." There was a long pause, and then they started speaking again. Denise's dark eyes were sparkling, and her pretty face was filled with an excitement. So I said to Denise, "Why don't you come upstairs with me? I'm a little suspicious." I had that little boy with the tennis shoes on my mind instead of any ghost, because that child could have slipped away from the ladies without their noticing it and gone upstairs into one of the rooms. Denise picked up her long skirt, and up we went. The first place we walked into was the master bedroom, and two windows were standing wide open. It was pouring rain, and the rain had come in and was all over the floor, and the curtains were dripping wet. I was angry, and I said to myself, "Do you suppose that boy came up here and opened those windows and prowled around?" Together we looked in the other rooms, but could see no evidence that anyone had been in them. The rain was so bad that it was almost dark out, although it was only about 2:30 in the afternoon. So I began to close all the windows, but the frames were all the original white cedar that swells up just like a sponge when it gets wet. They were so swollen that I could hardly close them, and I certainly don't know how anyone could have pulled them open. I could not get them bolted, and I said, "Denise, you're going to have to go downstairs and get a hammer." She said, "Let me try," and together we finally got the bolt over. Then we walked into the nursery, and once there began to relax because nothing was out of place. Suddenly, just a few feet behind us, a man's deep laugh rang out, and Denise said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "What did you hear?" She said, "I heard a man's laughter." I said, "So did I." "Let's get out of here," Denise cried, and with that she picked up her skirts and down the stairs she went, lickety-split. She dashed over to the telephone and called her mother. I knew that we had both heard laughter from the past. I felt what I can only describe as an intense, electric shock go through the length of my back, and for a few seconds I stood there, frozen, truly unable to move. I have never had anything affect me in such a way. As for Denise, her face was white and her eyes were terrified. I would have never imagined we could get down the stairs so fast in long dresses. It is a wonder we didn't break our necks. I don't recall Denise ever mentioning any desire for a supernatural experience again. After we began to talk about it downstairs, I remembered that the place we were standing when we heard the laugh was right over the location of the old gallows that stood there before Thomas Whaley built this house. He had watched the hanging of a colorful man named Yankee Jim, imprisoned for attempting to steal a boat. Yankee Jim's crime doesn't seem as grave as the sort for which men were ordinarily sentenced to hang, but unfortunately for him, his trial came upon the heels of the Indian uprising of 1851, when San Diego was under martial law, and any sort of disorder occasioned swift and sometimes harsh action. Yankee Jim did not take the sentence of hanging him seriously, and believing he would be pardoned at the last minute, even made jokes on his way up to the gallows. But he was not pardoned. His last moments were painful indeed, for when the wagon in which he was standing was pulled from under his feet, his neck remained unbroken. He continued to live for almost an hour until he finally strangled to death. It is possible that the laugh they heard that afternoon was Yankee Jim. It may be, admitted Mrs. Reading. I sometimes wonder if certain sounds remain forever in the atmosphere, or perhaps accessible, and now and then something we do sets them off. Then we hear that sound again, exactly as it once occurred. The footsteps, the laugh, even the old-fashioned melodies we occasionally hear playing in the music room of the house. Thomas Whaley once wrote a letter to his mother. "My wife is the best little woman in the world. Loved by all, she is proficient in music, plays, and sings. Perhaps she is still here." I could tell you many other strange things, continued June Reading, but the sound of that deep laugh shocked me more than anything else that has ever happened to me in this house. For those who are fascinated by ghost stories, it is said that 4 different ghosts have been identified in the Whaley house. The noisiest of all is reputed to be that of Yankee Jim. Whatever your tastes, you are welcome to enjoy a tour of this early home of the Old West, located at 2476 San Diego Avenue in San Diego, California. The Whaley House, with its rich and violent chronicles of yesteryear, is open to the public daily, year-round. The end.